So the first thing that I need y'all to do is to leave any notion that this is a normal Sunday morning church service behind. Okay? How many of y'all knew what the topic was going to be before y'all got in here today? Go ahead and raise your hands. And y'all still came. Look at that. That's impressive. So y'all aren't a normal audience because y'all still came. A lot of times, I'm like asked to speak at places, and I'm that ninja behind the door. The church says that they don't know about it, and I just pop out and surprise people. This is what we're talking about today. You can't leave yet, that kind of a thing. So I'm glad y'all knew about it. So I'm going to just start with this. I'm not a preacher. I've been up here a few times during this time slot where a lot of times preachers will preach. I'm not a preacher. I like much more would rather have a conversation with you guys. It's going to be back and forth. Are y'all okay with that? Okay. I figured y'all were, and you don't have much of a choice because I don't have anything to preach about. I'm going to have a conversation, but don't have a sermon here. David mentioned that I'm not an expert in immorality because of experience. I appreciate him saying that, but that's not exactly accurate. I have plenty of experience. On some level, if you're breathing, you've had some experience with sexual immorality. Maybe some of us more than others. But about 20 years ago, not quite to the day, but pretty close to 20 years ago, I had something come across my computer screen that floored me, that surprised me, caught me completely off guard. One, because of the content itself, it was pornography. I'd never seen internet pornography before. And the other reason was I was at class at Harding in a web design class. And this is when the web was just getting started. There weren't a ton of websites that were out there yet. And we were learning about what they called splash screens. And a splash screen was the first screen that came up. And so now when back then there wasn't really that many. And so we went to like www.ford.com, okay? And they would have a screen, an image that came up pretty quick. And the rule at the time was that first image had to come up within 30 seconds or people would get bored and go somewhere else. Now, could you imagine if you clicked on something and you waited 30 seconds to get anything to happen, right? They call it a splash screen. And so here it came, and within 30 seconds, oh my goodness, there was a F-150 on my screen. I thought that was amazing. This is just crazy how quick that was. And we went on to some other sites, and then somebody made the suggestion that we go to a government site because the government had websites as well. They gave us the address, but instead of .gov, which nobody had even heard of, we thought everything was .com. It was supposed to be .gov. We typed in this web address .com, and it was a pornography site. They had piggybacked off the name, just like now they do with all kinds of names, Pokemon and all this stuff. You misspell Pokemon, you're going to get a porn site, right? And so there it was in the Mac lab at Harding University, my first exposure to internet pornography. 30 screens with pornography all over it. And it didn't take 30 seconds to load that picture. It was almost instantaneous. The pornography industry has led the way in the development of the web. It's the reason we can pay online. It's the reason why we have FaceTime now and have video and audio communication, all led because of the pornography industry. I wish that was the last time I saw internet pornography. It was not. It was about 10 years after that I finally had conversations with my wife and my family about, I didn't know if I was addicted or not. I just said I've been looking at internet pornography and started to try to get some help. And that was about 10 years ago. And now, after trying to get some help and trying to get my own stuff figured out, I try to help other people that are struggling with some of the same issues. I used to think that sexual immorality was about sex. Would make sense, right? And it's got it right there in the title, sexual immorality. You would think that would have to do with sex. But let me throw out to you guys a question. What do you think some other options are? What do you think this sexual immorality stuff is really about? If it's not about sex, what are some other options? What was that? Lust, okay. Being connected. Yeah, keep on coming. Just because you know the answer, we're not going to assume anything about you, right? It's okay. It's perfectly fine to just think out loud about what may be a general consensus here. What are some other options of what sexual immorality is really all about? Gratifying the flesh, escape, desire, relationship, intimacy, acceptance, false love, fantasy, idolatry, unmet expectations. Well said. Revenge. Absolutely. We don't like to talk about that one a whole heck of a lot, but revenge is a big one. It's actually, there was a whole facet of this that's called eroticized rage, which is about our anger in life that gets played out in a sexual form. And a lot of times revenge is one of those. I've been hurt by this person, or I've been hurt by women, or I've been hurt by men in general, and I'm going to get my revenge. I'm going to pay back because of this. Other thoughts? What it could be about? I mean, all these are accurate. Addiction. Absolutely. Control. Absolutely. And so this is what I want to pose to you. It's not about sex, okay? Any more than somebody that's struggling with morbid obesity just really likes food. Okay, I think we all we like to eat. Food's okay. But when you hit a place of sexual immorality where you have lost yourself in that world, that doesn't have to do a whole lot with sex or something else going on there. If you look at Pornhub's stats for the year, Pornhub is not the biggest, but one of the major sites where pornography is distributed. And pornography is just one subtype of sexual immorality. I think it's actually the thing that's driving the force in our culture. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But if you look at their statistics, one of the things you'll find is that pornography is more rampant than we probably would ever like to admit. But 24% of the people that are going to Pornhub are women. So we're not in here to talk to the men. Okay, 24% of the people that are actively accessing pornography, that's probably pretty low. At some point in time, we're going to figure out that it's 50-50. It's like when alcoholism was first being talked about, they thought it was just a male problem, and now we know that it's about half, right? Men and women. So about half the people walking around the planet are women, and about half of them are men. And so when we talk about people that are struggling with sexual immorality, we're going to find out that half of them are women, and half of them are men. Some women might be going on there to see if the ex-revenge side. Oh, could be. That's a big deal. Yeah, there's all kinds of reasons that would lead them there, right? So this is what I'm going to ask you here. If you get a couple more quotes just real quick. Porn sites get more visits each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. Okay, Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined, porn sites get more visits. Okay, it's quite amazing. But if you look at and this is all from Pornhub. They print all their statistics for the year. So I didn't go through every picture and document this myself. This is their own stats that they print. In each video, each picture, all that stuff, there's always a comment section. Okay, People are making comments and all this kind of stuff. The most word used in comments when people are searching or just commenting about pornography on Pornhub, give me a guess what the number one word might be. And I won't have to wash your mouth out with soap on this word, okay? It's a word that can be said even on a Sunday morning. What do you think the most common word might be? Love. Love. So the word love is used more often on Pornhub than any other word. Love. Okay? If you go to Instagram, their own published stats, you'll always have a little hashtag in there. The number one word used in Instagram is love. Right? We're looking for love, right? There's a few songs about that, I'm sure, right? We're looking for love, but we're looking for it in places where it does not exist. It does not exist. So just for a moment, I want to go back to the very, very beginning that started out as a love story, a real love story. And we're going to see how we got off track a little bit, because my guess is that not everybody in here is struggling with pornography issues. And I don't see a whole lot of kids in here, but I'll say why I said age 12 and up. Ever since Playboy was first published, the average age of exposure to pornography was 12. That's around the time of puberty. And so it's been dropping ever since the internet came around. Now if you're 4 or 5 years old, I've got, my youngest one is 4. He watches little videos online, that kind of stuff. They're connected from birth, right? We live in a different world. And so, although there are different statistics that are out there, somewhere between 10 all the way down to age 8 is the most common exposure to pornography now. And so, if they're getting exposure to pornography around 8, 9, and 10, that's average age, which means some are younger than that, right? If they're getting exposure to that, and then we excuse them from the conversation, then the only place they're getting any type of information or education is from a place we do not want them to be getting it from. So I think it's important that they're part of the conversation. But if we go back to the very beginning, I think it actually starts out that way, right? The words are actually in the beginning. That's the very beginning, right? In the beginning, when God started creating us, He created Adam. Okay, now remind me how the story goes with creation, right? He made Adam, and what all else did He make? He made the stars, and y'all know the song. I don't know the song, but anyway, y'all, I'm sure you can sing it. And so at some point here, Adam had all the animals that were brought before him. You remember this part? And he gets to name them all. Now, how he knew what to name them, I don't know. That would be pretty daunting, I would think. If you were supposed to create thousands of new words, I think that would be a difficult task. But anyway, at some point in time, I see this in my a bit warped mind that Adam, one day was doing all this work, naming the animals, and here come a couple bunnies that run by, and okay, I'm going to call those bunnies, And the next day there were like 12 bunnies, and he's like, well, that's odd. And the next day there was 80 bunnies, and then there was 2,000 bunnies, and he's like, well, something is strange here. I don't know because I don't see anything like that happening with me here. And so Adam was walking around with God. He was in the presence of God. He was communing with God. He was in relationship with God. He was in love with God. But he looked around and saw that something wasn't the same for him as it was for everybody else. And I think he had to go through that process. I think it was intentional for God to have Adam look around and say, this all looks great, but this is not me. So I need, something, it needs to be different here. And so then he made Eve. And at the very end, I think it's chapter 2, the last verse in chapter 2, it says that they were naked and they felt no shame. Now, Adam they didn't even know what shame was at that point, right? They were naked and they felt no shame. Okay. And then we go a little bit further down the road, and I think it's interesting about relationship. I'd try to throw these little things in here that are a little bit off topic, but ultimately this is all about relationship. If I remember right, if it's chronological, if it happened, in kind of the order it spells out there, God talked to Adam first about not eating of the tree. You remember that? You may be able to pull it up in your Bibles, but God talked to Adam. I don't remember there, and I may be missing it. I don't remember there being any spot where God specifically said something to Eve about it. He may have. I may have misread there. But he talked to Adam about it, which means when Eve came along, who had to tell Eve about it? Perhaps Adam. There was a relationship. There was protection. There was the joining together. This is of significance. I heard this from God. I need to share it with you. It's about relationship. It's about love. Well, they finally get to this spot, and Satan decides he's going to tempt Adam and Eve. And so he sets about the temptation. And basically, what was the temptation? And don't worry about the eating of the fruit. That was just a manifestation of the temptation. What was the real temptation? To be like God. To be like God. Right? To have this knowledge. And that there normally is a consequence. At least that's what God said. You don't want to do this. And Satan is exaggerating it. He's manipulating. And basically what he's saying is, there won't be a consequence. The only consequence that you're going to have is something that's going to be positive. God doesn't want you to have that. So he starts to spin his little lies there about God and about relationship. And so Eve and Adam both eat. Somebody fill in the blanks after that. What starts happening after that as far as relationship goes between Adam and Eve and God? What happens pretty instantaneously after they eat? Shame. Shame shows up. Blame. Fear. Okay, you're hitting all the high points right off the bat here. So instantaneously, their eyes were open, right? And they saw that they were what? They saw they were naked for the first time. They had been naked the whole time. And it wasn't because the scales fell off of their eyes. It's because their concept of shame entered into the picture. And there's something about nakedness that is metaphor for who we are. When we're completely naked, when we're completely vulnerable, it's us. We're just us. And when they were just completely them and they saw themselves with sin attached, they felt shame. They felt shame. We don't like to feel shame, do we? Everybody in here knows what it feels like to feel shame, and we don't like it. And so the first thing that a lot of times we do when we feel shame is we go to the word that rhymes, and that's blame. It's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. Got passed around to Adam, I tried to pass it off to God. You gave this woman to me, whatever it was, it's the serpent. And so one of the definitions of blame by this woman named Brene Brown, she's a kind of a famous social worker, is that it's the discharge of pain and discomfort. When we blame somebody, we are trying to get rid of our own pain and our own discomfort. We don't like it. We want somebody else to take it from us. So we blame. So they felt shame. They started to blame. Then they began to feel the fear. Fear started showing up. Now, what do you think the fear was? God was going to see them. And what would God think about them? Wouldn't like it. Right? Wouldn't that be the fear? I did something I wasn't supposed to do. This is going to change our relationship. How's this going to impact us? What's he going to do? And so what was their plan? They fell to temptation. They felt shame. They started to blame. They had fear. And then what was their plan? Hide. They went and got some leaves. And they covered themselves up with some leaves. And then they decided they were going to hide. That's the story of every one of us in here. That's the story of all of us. Falling to temptation, feeling the shame. For a while, we usually try to blame others. worrying and being in fear about how it's going to hurt relationship or change the relationship between us and our family, between us and God, and we start trying to figure out how we're going to hide it. How are we going to hide this? And so we have this weird paradox that's going on, because this thing that makes us feel shame, and all of a sudden we become very aware of our vulnerability, of our nakedness. We feel that, and it's scary, but yet we long for the connection that we had. We still long to be so connected and to be so loved and to be so vulnerable and to be so without shame that we can be naked and not be ashamed. And so we feel shame and we look for love. And so we are trying to figure out, how in the world are we going to feel love when I'm still hiding? And it usually shows up in that way as sexual immorality. It's one of the ways it's going to manifest itself. And so, Adam and Eve, both of them, somebody before and asked what it could be about. All good answers. One of the words that I think really stands out besides love, I think they're looking for love, they're looking for connection. But it shows up in sexual immorality because they're trying to control the way it happens. They're trying to be the ones that take control over it. Because if I'm vulnerable, because if I allow God to work in my life, because if I'm truly naked, if I'm truly exposing myself emotionally completely to somebody in a relationship, it's pretty scary, and I don't like it, and I may get hurt, and I may be rejected, and so I'm going to control how my life goes, and I'm going to control what's happening. It's not just with sex. It's across the board usually. But when it shows up with sex, it usually shows up in a way that's not real helpful. I want us to think about, if we start there with Adam and Eve and we kind of just work our way out in the Bible a little bit, what are some of the, we're just going to break them down. And I haven't gone through all of them, but I feel like this is a common theme of control and how it manifests itself with sexual immorality. And so we're just going to pick some. So if you start there with Adam and Eve and you start working out, what are some of the first stories about sexuality that you can remember being in the Bible? Early on, Genesis time period. What are some of the stories that are in there? They may not even use the word sex, but Hamar, is that Tamar, yeah. Remind me, Tamar. Is that David's son, Tamar? Yes. Yes, David's son raped his daughter. Okay, so let's back up just a little bit, because David didn't do anything about it. Is that right? Remember that story. So here we are. David's daughter gets raped by his son, and David the king, who went out against Goliath and slayed him, does nothing when his own son rapes his own daughter. It's a little strange. So let's make that make sense a little bit. What happened in David's life that may get him to a spot where he doesn't feel like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be the one casting stones here. I think I'm just going to do nothing. I'm going to hide. Bathsheba. So he saw Bathsheba. He took control. Right? Lust was there. Desires of the flesh were all there. All those kind of things. But ultimately, he was looking for love. He was looking for connection. He was looking for relationship. He was looking to do it in a selfish way. He was the king. He took control. He did what he wanted to do, the way that he wanted to do it. It manifested itself in immorality. It changed his life forever from that point on. He was not the same man after that. Was not the same man. Let's go back even before that. Some more stories. There you go. And why did he do that? That's right. So Abraham was in foreign land, right? Was afraid of his own life because his wife was so beautiful. They were going to just kill him or take his wife or whatever. And so he starts saying, oh, you can have my wife. He starts controlling it himself. I'm going to do it the way that I think it needs to be done. I'm going to be the one who's in control. I'm going to make the decision. Didn't work out real well. Absolutely. Even before that, there was a little bit of control there. Yeah, Lot. Let's go back to Lot. There's a good chunk of stuff around Lot. When do we first run into sexual issues with Lot in his story? That's right. Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, now I talk quite frequently talking about same-sex attraction, homosexuality, and this kind of thing. And I feel like the Bible is very clear. I don't think that we have to invent things to go the way we want them to in the Bible. Okay, and so I want to say this: the Bible is pretty clear about why Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. Okay, it talks about it in several different places. They were not hospitable, they were greedy, they were immoral, there were a lot of things. It wasn't just because they were a homosexual city. Now, I want you to think about what that would even mean. That somehow Lot found a city that had nothing but homosexual men, and he thought, that's where I'm going to go live. I don't think that was what happened here. This was not about homosexuality in this story. Right? But you have Lot was living there with his family. Here comes people that we, were angels. At least that was the idea here. And so these guests came to the town, and then here came all the men. At least that's what the Bible says. Every one of them show up and say, we want to have sex with these men. What is that about? That's about control. That's about control. It's not about a city full of homosexual men just wanting to have sex for pleasure. This is the way that we show dominance in this town. And then what did Lot do? Offered his 2 daughters. Okay, Lot decided he was going to take charge of the situation. These guys were trying to show control. He was saying, please don't do this to these men. They're my guests here. I'm going to give you my 2 virgin daughters. Not the Dad Hall of Fame moment. His picture's not going to be there. And so then the story with Lot continues. What's the next time we run into Lot and these 2 daughters? They show up later.
They run off into a cave.
They go off into a cave. And what happens there? Daughters get the dad drunk. They think they're not going to be married, they're not going to have kids, and so they get their dad drunk, they have sex with him, and both of them get pregnant. Yeah. And so this is what I want you to consider. Where did they come up with this idea? Did they grow up in Sodom? Is this is where they lived, in the place where when control was exerted, it was done so in a sexual fashion? And I'm going to take control over my life. It shows up with sexual immorality. It's going to show up in a lot of areas of life. But sexual immorality is one of the places that we can see our own attempts to control. Our own attempts to control. So what are the things, or what are the reasons why? That's way back in whatever BC, right? That was a long time ago. What are the reasons why we're still trying to control today? Why do people that would be sitting in this audience, and you can either do a self-disclosure if you want, or you can just say in general, why are we still trying to control things? So, yeah, we were taught. And what were we taught about control? Control will bring happiness. It brings power. Security. Who really has control? God, right? And so in the same way that Satan was back there tempting Adam and Eve and saying, this is a little bit of control, you can be like God, we're still being tempted today to try to dethrone God and become God ourselves. I think what Karen earlier you said, idolatry. Right? Something that sexual immorality could be about idolatry. It's about dethroning God. So what are some other reasons why we would control today? Fear. Yeah. So we're going right back. You see, we've evolved a lot since Adam and Eve, haven't we? We were driving around in vehicles and flying to the moon and all this kind of stuff. I mean, we've come a long way as we still try to be like God. And we sin and we feel shame and we blame others and we hide. And it continues to manifest itself because we cannot be in a place of a shame-filled experience or a shame-filled existence. We cannot be in that moment and be truly vulnerable and truly cling to somebody else. They don't exist at the same time. When you are truly connected, shame begins to disperse. And so when we don't deal with that shame, when we don't deal with our fear, but we try to connect anyway, we have to wall off a little bit of who we are. We have to hide a little bit who we are. We can't truly connect with other people. And so we don't have the love that we're really looking for. And so we continue to find it. Maybe the next person will be able to make me feel loved. Maybe the next person will be able to make me feel loved. Maybe this situation will make me feel loved. And we keep reaching out, looking for love, when the answer is really turning inward and finding God inside of us, finding the connection with Him, because He has cleansed us and made a home with us so that we become one with God. So what are the ways that we try to control? And sexuality is just one area. What are some other ways that we try to control? Money. You bet. What are some other ways? What's that? Aggressiveness? Yeah, you bet. Aggressiveness. Schedules. It's hard to get a control of that sometimes. Yeah. Eating? There you go. Getting in the right position, having the authority. You bet. Education. The more I know, the more I'll be able to control.
Religion.
How so? Talk about that one a little bit.
Well, being moralistic is following like the Pharisees did, a list of do's and don'ts, not having the heart.
There you go. I think that one is. I think that one's important. We again, I'll go back to this woman named Brene Brown to quote her. She says that faith without vulnerability, or faith minus vulnerability, equals extremism. Faith is inherently a vulnerable thing. It means you don't have all the evidence, all the proof. You have to have faith. And so it's inherently vulnerable. And when you take vulnerability out of that, it becomes very extreme, very dogmatic. It's got to be this way. Here are the list of rules. You better check these off or else. It's our attempt to control something that is outside of our control. It is our fear. And it shows up in religion quite often. Quite often. What are other ways we try to control? Absolutely.
With our words, I mean, what's a little bit of aggression, but with our words, I think we try to control.
You bet. There we go. Manipulation.
There's still some physical dominance, I'm sure.
You bet. I'm bigger than you, so I can physically control this. Yeah, mentally and emotionally trying to control it. You see, it shows up all over the place. And so to really get a handle on sexual immorality, we have to get a handle on us. We have to get a handle on what is going on inside of us. We have to get a handle on our own shame. We have to get a handle on our own fear of vulnerability. Because when we do not, it's going to show up in many different ways. And for somebody, it may show up more with sexual immorality. Somebody else, it may show up with monetary immorality, or with food, or you name it. We can keep going down the list. It may show up a little bit differently. But the world is selling us a lie, and that is that you can have control, that you can exert your dominance, that you can find love, that you can be like God, and you can do it in a sexual way, and that is the place that you're supposed to find it. There's a song, I'm just going to look up the lyrics, but some of y'all may have heard it. It's called Take Me to Church. Y'all heard this one? It was on, you couldn't go anywhere without hearing it. If you were in a store, you heard it playing. When I just kind of heard the chorus, I thought, well, this is an interesting song. Take Me to Church, playing on the radio. This isn't a Christian station. I'll turn it up. And it had all this weird verbiage, like many weird songs have, that I didn't understand half of it. So I tried to figure out, what is this about? Take Me to Church, because it started talking about sexuality, and I'm like, what is going on here? And it was a song, and I don't know if it hit number one, but it was on the top of the charts and the top for months and months and months and months, all last year, that I'm sure was going more to a younger audience than older. But the idea behind the song of Take Me to Church is that sex is God, or this person that I'm with sexually is God, and that the sexual experience is worship. And so take me to church. It's time to have sex. This is where we experience true worship. Now, I think it was obviously completely misguided, but with a little bit of truth that they didn't even know that they were talking about. Because God did create sexuality. And I believe that there is a certain intentionality to the fact that God is inherently in relationship, because it's 3 in 1, right? 3 in 1. So God is in relationship. When God is just God, God is in relationship. 3 in 1. And then God created man and woman to come together to be one flesh. And I think God, because of the way that he designed it and the way that he is in relationship with us, is part of that union as well. So once again, we have 3 in 1. I think it is an experience of what God intended. But it does not replace who God is. It is not what is to be worshiped. It is what is just an example of God's love and connection with us, and the way he designed us to be able to become one flesh and experience a little bit of what he has in a relationship of 3 being 1. So can it be a spiritual experience? You bet. You bet. Or it can become the golden calf that we begin to worship and miss the whole point. And so when it comes to talking about sexual immorality, I told my dad on the way up here, I'm thankful I don't have to convince y'all that that's not a good idea, is to be sexually immoral, right? I mean, we're not having that discussion of should I or shouldn't I, maybe it's a good idea or not. We know it doesn't work. We know that it harms us. Okay? And I think I'm hoping that you can understand a little bit, or you can look inside yourself and see, what am I trying to benefit by this behavior, by this action? If it's through pornography, if it's through affairs, if it's through lust, if it's through one relationship after another, whatever it may be, however it may manifest itself, can you look inside and say, what am I benefiting here? What am I trying to get? What am I really trying to get? I think usually it's going to come back down to something to do with love and relationship and connection. And it's going to be manifesting itself in a way that we're trying to control it. And when we're trying to control it, we're taking the place of God in our own lives, and it's not working out real well. And so ultimately, I think this is what we have to figure out, is when sin enters the picture, it prevents us from being connected to each other, connected to God. We begin to feel shame. We start to blame. And then we go and hide. And so the only way to really deal with sexual immorality, if we want to get back to a place of sexual health, we have to intervene in that little process a little bit. And so in one way or another, we're all sitting in here with fig leaves on of our own design. I doubt we have shared our deepest, darkest struggles with everybody in here. Maybe some of y'all have. But typically, there's still stuff inside of us that we have yet to figure out, or that we have yet to confess, we have yet to disclose. And when we're in that spot, even if we come to church, and even if we put a smile on our face, and even if we walk around with the Bible in our hand, we're not truly enjoying the connection of true relationship with each other and with God. So we have to intervene in this process. And so the way that we intervene in the process, one, is we stop sinning. That would be, a good place to start. Go and sin no more kind of a concept. We're all going to continue to sin. Nobody's going to probably be perfect from this day forward. But that's our goal. That's our attempt, is to continue to get closer to God, to sin less, to love more, to be in a relationship with Him more. So that's one of them. But the next thing to do is we have to figure out, how are we going to combat the shame that has caused me to blame and hide. And this is how it's done. Doesn't matter if it's about sexual immorality, doesn't matter what the sin is. The way that it works is that shame cannot withstand empathy. Empathy trumps it. Empathy wins. Because shame basically is the fear that I'm not good enough, or that I'm broken, that I'm flawed, that if I share who I am, if people really see me naked, emotionally, vulnerable, spiritually, in every way, if they really see me, they're going to know something's wrong with me, they're not going to like me, they're going to be done with me. And so I would rather cover stuff up and pretend like everything is okay. Blame others if necessary, but I'm going to hide. And empathy shows up when we take the fig leaves off, when we say, this is who I am, this is what I've been through, this is what I've done, this is what I've felt, the good, bad, and the ugly. You share who you are. And in response, they don't say, I don't want to have anything to do with you, or how dare you, or how could you, or we're kicking you out of here, or whatever it may be. The empathetic response is, me too. I'm in the same boat. Some of the circumstances may be different. I'm in the same boat. I've sinned. I've tried to take the place of God and control things myself. I've been ashamed of myself. I've blamed others at times. I know what it's like to try to hide. Me too.